Girl helps cheetah give birth, but what happened next was shocking. The sun was setting, casting an amber glow over the vast plains of the Masai Mara in Kenya. Emma, a young wildlife researcher barely out of college, had been working with a local conservation group for the past few months. She had always dreamed of studying big cats in the wild, and here she was, immersed in the very world she had once only admired from afar through nature documentaries. But nothing had prepared her for what she was about to experience. As she drove her old Land Cruiser across the dirt path, returning from a day of observations, something unusual caught her eye. A silhouette in the distance, limping and struggling. Instinctively, Emma slowed down, her heart quickening. There, only about 50 meters away, was a lone cheetah. It wasn't just any cheetah though, this one was clearly pregnant and something was very wrong. Emma stopped the vehicle, her pulse racing. Cheetahs, known for their unmatched speed, were usually elusive and graceful. But this one was different. The animal looked desperate, its legs trembling with each step. Emma knew better than to intervene with wildlife. Nature had its own rules, and human interference could often make things worse. But this time her gut told her something else. This cheetah wasn't just struggling, it was in peril. She grabbed her binoculars, zooming in on the cheetah's face. Sweat dripped down the animal's fur, its eyes wide and filled with fear. Then, suddenly, Emma realized what was happening. The cheetah was about to give birth, but it seemed to be in distress, perhaps due to a previous injury. Emma had seen footage of births before, but never in the wild, never this close, and certainly never under these conditions. The moment was critical. She could feel it. If the cheetah didn't give birth soon, both the mother and the cubs might die. Emma's mind raced through what she had learned during her training. While she wasn't a veterinarian, she had enough experience to understand when an animal needed help. Yet, helping a wild cheetah in labor was dangerous, unpredictable, and utterly nerve-wracking. Just as she was contemplating her next move, the cheetah collapsed, letting out a weak but heart-wrenching whimper. Emma didn't think twice. She grabbed her emergency medical kit from the back of the car and cautiously stepped out. Her hands were shaking, but she knew this was her only chance to save the animal. As she approached, the cheetah eyed her warily, trying to get up but failing miserably. Emma kept her movements slow, her heart pounding in her chest as she whispered softly to the animal. She didn't know if the cheetah could understand her voice, but the calm tone seemed to offer some comfort. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm going to help." The cheetah was too weak to resist, but Emma knew it still had the potential to lash out. One swipe from those claws could end her life, but she didn't care. The animal's distress was too overwhelming to ignore. Kneeling beside the majestic creature, Emma examined the situation closely. It appeared that the labor had stalled due to sheer exhaustion, but the cubs were likely still alive. Emma had studied wild births before, but she had never been part of one. Now, as she took a deep breath and placed her hands on the cheetah's abdomen, she could feel the delicate movements of the cubs inside. Her instincts kicked in, she knew she had to act fast or both the mother and the cubs would be lost. She gently massaged the cheetah's abdomen, trying to stimulate contractions. The cheetah's breathing was labored, its eyes glazed over with pain. Every moment felt like an eternity. Emma's hands worked tirelessly, praying that she was doing the right thing. After what felt like hours, though only a few minutes had passed, the first cub began to emerge. Emma's heart leaped with relief. It was a small, fragile thing barely breathing, but it was alive. Carefully, she helped the mother push the cub out, and within moments, it was lying in the grass, its tiny chest rising and falling with faint breaths. Emma wiped the sweat from her brow, her heart racing. There were more cubs on the way. With the first one safely delivered, she repeated the process, her hands trembling less this time, fueled by determination. One by one, 3 more cubs were born, each smaller than the last but alive, their faint cries filling the air. The mother cheetah, too exhausted to acknowledge the cubs, lay still, her sides heaving. Emma knew that the cheetah needed immediate care. She cleaned the cubs gently, making sure they were breathing properly, then turned her attention back to the mother. Using a syringe from her kit, she administered a small dose of an anti-inflammatory drug she kept for emergencies like this, hoping it would help ease the animal's pain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the savanna, Emma sat back on her heels, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She had just helped bring 4 new lives into the world, but she knew the battle was far from over. The mother cheetah was still weak, her strength sapped by the difficult labor. The cubs, though alive, were fragile and vulnerable. Predators would soon be on the prowl, and the mother would need to protect her young. Emma realized she couldn't leave them here, not like this. If she did, the chances of survival for the cubs were slim, and the mother's weakened state made her an easy target. She had to think fast. Looking around, Emma spotted a large rock formation a few hundred meters away. It would provide temporary shelter from the open plains and buy the cheetah some time to recover. With no other options, Emma knew she had to get the cheetah and her cubs to safety. She had never been this close to such a powerful animal before, let alone one so vulnerable. But something inside her refused to give up. Emma grabbed a blanket from her car and approached the cheetah once more. "I know you don't trust me," she murmured, carefully lifting one of the cubs and placing it on the blanket. "But you have to let me help you." The mother cheetah watched her, too weak to move but too proud to give up. Emma wrapped the cubs in the blanket and gently scooped them up, carrying them toward the rock formation. Once she had set them down in a safe spot, she returned to the mother. Kneeling beside the exhausted cheetah, Emma hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around the animal's body. With all her strength, she managed to lift the cheetah enough to drag her toward the temporary shelter. Every muscle in her body screamed with effort, but Emma pushed through, knowing that this might be the only chance for the cheetah and her cubs to survive the night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the rock formation. The cheetah collapsed onto the ground, her breathing shallow but steady. Emma placed the cubs beside her, making sure they were nestled close to their mother. She stood back watching the scene in awe. The cheetah licked each of her newborns, weakly acknowledging their presence. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass as darkness fell over the plains. Emma knew she couldn't stay long. Wildlife in the Masai Mara was unpredictable, especially at night. But she couldn't just leave them without protection. With a heavy heart, she pulled out her phone and called the conservation center, explaining the situation. "I need a team out here as soon as possible," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "We'll send help right away," the voice on the other end replied. Hanging up, Emma sat down beside the cheetah, her body aching from the day's events. The cubs were huddled together, nursing from their mother, who looked at peace for the first time since Emma had found her. A strange bond had formed between them, one that Emma couldn't quite explain. As the minutes ticked by, Emma kept a close watch on the horizon, hoping the rescue team would arrive before any predators did. But something told her this was only the beginning of an unforgettable journey, one that would forever change the way she saw the wild. The night in the Masai Mara was unlike anything Emma had ever experienced before. The sky was painted with a blanket of stars, but beneath the serene beauty was a wilderness full of dangers. Every distant growl, every rustling of leaves, sent her heart racing as she sat beside the exhausted cheetah and her cubs. The bond she had formed with the mother cheetah during the birth was fragile but real, and she wasn't about to leave them in their vulnerable state. Hours had passed since Emma had called for help, but the conservation team hadn't arrived yet. She began to grow anxious, scanning the horizon every few minutes for headlights, but all she saw was the darkness of the savannah stretching endlessly around her. The cubs were nestled tightly against their mother, their tiny bodies shivering slightly in the cool night air. The cheetah, still too weak to move much, seemed to trust Emma enough to stay close without displaying aggression, but the situation was becoming dire. The sounds of the night grew louder as predators stirred. Hyenas, notorious scavengers, could be heard in the distance, their eerie laughter echoing across the plains. Emma felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She knew that a weak cheetah and her newborn cubs would be easy prey if the hyenas came any closer. Glancing at her Land Cruiser parked a few hundred meters away, Emma considered moving the cubs inside for protection, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Separating them from their mother would be disastrous. Emma took a deep breath and focused on what she could control. She had brought her emergency flashlight and a flare gun, which she hoped would be enough to scare off any approaching predators. But even with those tools, she felt unprepared. She wasn't a seasoned ranger, just a young researcher who had been thrust into a life-or-death situation. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but she knew she had to stay calm for the sake of the cheetah and her cubs. Just as Emma was beginning to lose hope, she heard a rustling in the tall grass nearby. Her body went rigid with fear. She squinted into the darkness, trying to make out what was coming. The rustling grew louder and then, suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. Emma's heart nearly stopped. It was a hyena, and it was not alone. Slowly, several more sets of eyes emerged from the shadows, their figures moving silently through the grass toward her and the cheetah. Emma's pulse quickened as she reached for the flare gun. Her hands trembled, but she managed to pull it out and aim it toward the approaching predators. The hyenas had formed a loose circle around the small group, their eyes fixed on the weakened mother cheetah and her vulnerable cubs. They moved with an eerie confidence, knowing that the odds were in their favor. "Stay back," Emma shouted, her voice shaky but firm. She fired the flare into the sky, and the sudden burst of light startled the hyenas. They hesitated, retreating slightly, but not enough to convince Emma that they were gone for good. The flare flickered and then disappeared into the night, leaving the area bathed in darkness once more. Emma could hear the hyenas pacing, their sinister laughter growing louder. She needed to do something more, something that would buy her and the cheetah more time. Grabbing her flashlight, Emma stood up and shone it directly at the hyenas, trying to keep them at bay. She knew that hyenas were opportunistic. They wouldn't attack if they thought it wasn't worth the risk. But the mother cheetah was too weak to fight and the cubs were defenseless. The odds were still stacked against them. The hyenas inched closer again, undeterred by the light. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the situation was more dangerous than she had anticipated. She needed help and she needed it now. She pulled out her phone and checked for a signal, praying that she could reach the conservation center again. But as she feared, there was no service this far out in the wild. Just when she thought all hope was lost, the sound of an engine broke through the night. Headlights appeared on the horizon, illuminating the tall grass as the rescue team's truck came into view. Relief washed over Emma like a wave. She turned back to the hyenas, who had paused at the sight of the approaching vehicle. The headlights alone were enough to scare them off, and within moments the predators retreated into the darkness. The truck rolled to a stop next to Emma's Land Cruiser, and two rangers jumped out, their faces serious but calm. They assessed the situation quickly, taking note of the cheetah and her cubs. "You did well," one of the rangers said, nodding at Emma. "We'll take it from here." Emma stepped back, allowing the professionals to take over. The rangers worked swiftly, checking the mother cheetah's condition and making sure the cubs were safe. They administered fluids and pain relief to the mother, stabilizing her as best they could in the field. "She's lucky you were here," the other ranger said as he finished his assessment. "Without your help, she probably wouldn't have made it." Emma's exhaustion began to catch up with her as she watched the rangers work. She felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief that the cheetah was now in good hands, and disbelief that she had just helped deliver 4 cheetah cubs in the wild while fending off hyenas. "We're going to move her to a safer area," one of the rangers explained. "She and her cubs need time to recover, and this isn't the best place for that." Emma nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The Masai Mara was a beautiful but brutal place, and without intervention the cheetah family wouldn't stand a chance. The rangers gently lifted the cheetah onto a stretcher, being careful not to disturb her fragile cubs, who had fallen into a peaceful sleep. Emma helped gather the cubs, placing them carefully into a crate lined with soft blankets. As she did so, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for these tiny creatures she had helped bring into the world. Once the cheetah and her cubs were secured in the truck, Emma followed the rangers in her Land Cruiser as they drove toward a safer, more protected area of the reserve. The drive was long and quiet, the weight of the night's events settling heavily on her shoulders. But despite her exhaustion, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something incredible had happened, something far beyond just a rescue. They arrived at a secluded area of the reserve, far from where the hyenas roamed. It was an enclosed section designed for animals in recovery, a place where the mother cheetah and her cubs could heal in peace without the constant threat of predators. The rangers carefully unloaded the animals and placed them in a small shelter, providing food and water for the mother. Emma stayed for a while, watching as the cubs wriggled closer to their mother, who was now resting comfortably in her new surroundings. The scene was peaceful, almost surreal. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, the cheetah had been on the brink of death. As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, casting a soft glow over the reserve, Emma realized that her life had changed forever. The connection she felt with the cheetah and her cubs was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if she had been part of something larger, something primal and powerful. But little did Emma know, this was just the beginning. The events of the next few weeks would leave her, and the world, utterly shocked. The days that followed were filled with cautious optimism. The cheetah, whom the rangers began calling Saba, in honor of her 7 successful hunts that had been recorded in the months before she became pregnant, gradually regained her strength. Emma visited her often in the secluded recovery area, each time checking on the cubs and their mother's healing process. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that Saba and her offspring were safe, away from the dangers of the wild for the moment. But the wild had a way of reminding everyone of its power, no matter how secure things seemed. A week had passed since the night Emma had helped deliver the cubs, and as she watched the tiny creatures grow stronger each day, she couldn't help but feel a growing attachment. Their innocent eyes, wide with curiosity, now began to open more fully, and they would playfully paw at each other, tumbling in the grass. Their soft purring sounds filled the air, and Emma's heart softened with each passing day. However, it wasn't long before the real test presented itself, a test that would force Emma to confront the deeper realities of the natural world. One morning, as Emma was preparing for her daily visit to check on Saba and her cubs, she received an urgent call from the head ranger, Mateo. "Emma, we have a situation," his voice came through strained. "There's been an escape. Saba and the cubs are gone." Emma's heart sank, her mind racing. "What do you mean they're gone?" "We believe a storm last night damaged part of the fencing in the recovery area. We've already dispatched teams to track them, but they're out in the open now." The reality of the situation hit her hard. Saba, still recovering from childbirth, was back in the wild with her 4 vulnerable cubs, without the full strength she needed to protect them from predators. Emma knew that the Masai Mara was a harsh place, especially for a mother with newborns. Within minutes, Emma had joined Mateo and the team of rangers as they began the search. The sun was rising quickly, casting long shadows over the savanna as they combed through the tall grass, looking for signs of Saba. Emma's heart raced as they followed the faint trail, her thoughts consumed with worry. The scent of the cubs and their mother was fresh, but in a land as vast and unpredictable as this, time was not on their side. It wasn't long before the first signs of trouble emerged. "Over here," one of the rangers called out, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. The group quickly gathered around to inspect it. Emma's stomach churned as she knelt down to examine the ground. "Paw prints. Big ones. Lions," Mateo said, his voice grim. "A pride must have passed through here not too long ago." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Lions were Saba's greatest threat. While a cheetah could outrun a lion in a straight race, Saba was weakened, and her cubs were far too young to defend themselves. The thought of them being caught by a lion pride filled her with dread. She could almost hear the echoes of that fateful night with the hyenas, but this time the stakes felt even higher. "We need to find her before they do," Mateo said, his tone urgent but calm. The group pushed forward, their pace quickening as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat of the day began to set in, making the search more difficult. But Emma didn't care. She was driven by one thing, the need to save Saba and her cubs. She felt responsible for them for having brought them into the world that night, and she wasn't about to let them fall victim to the wild now. Hours passed with no sign of Saba, but Emma refused to give up. She knew they had to be close. Then, just as they were nearing the edge of a dense thicket, they heard it, a sound that sent chills down Emma's spine. It was the unmistakable growl of a lion. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she and the rangers crouched low, inching forward to get a better view. Through the tall grass they saw them, 3 lionesses stalking something hidden in the brush. Emma's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Saba was trapped. The mother cheetah was lying low, her body curled protectively around her cubs, but it was clear that she was outnumbered. The lionesses were closing in, their golden eyes fixed on their prey. Saba let out a low growl, a warning, but it was clear that she was too weak to fight off an entire pride. "Emma, stay back," Mateo whispered, signaling to the rangers to ready their tranquilizer guns. But Emma couldn't just stay back. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She had been there when these cubs were born, and now they were on the brink of being lost to the wild. Her heart ached at the thought of losing them. In a split-second decision, she grabbed a flare from her belt, the same flare that had saved them from the hyenas, and fired it into the air. The sudden burst of light and noise startled the lionesses, causing them to pause. It wasn't much, but it bought them precious seconds. Mateo and the rangers sprang into action, firing tranquilizer darts toward the lionesses. 2 of the lionesses were hit, stumbling to the ground as the tranquilizers took effect, but the third one, the leader, remained standing, her eyes still locked on Saba. Emma felt her pulse race as she reached for another flare, praying it would work. Just as she was about to fire, the lioness charged forward, her massive body hurtling towards Saba and her cubs. Time seemed to slow down. Emma's heart pounded in her ears as she watched the scene unfold in terrifying slow motion. Saba let out a desperate hiss, shielding her cubs as best she could, but the lioness was too fast. The massive predator lunged, her claws outstretched. But then, something miraculous happened. Saba, despite her weakened state, leaped to her feet with a burst of energy Emma didn't know she still had. With a fierce growl, the cheetah lunged at the lioness, not to attack, but to divert her attention away from her cubs. The lioness was taken aback for a split second, just enough time for Matteo to fire the final tranquilizer dart. The lioness stumbled, her powerful body collapsing to the ground just inches away from Saba. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stood frozen, her heart racing as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Saba, the mother cheetah who had been too weak to even stand a week ago, had summoned the strength to protect her cubs from certain death. As the tranquilized lioness lay on the ground, Emma rushed to Saba's side. The cheetah was panting heavily, her body trembling from the effort, but she was alive. The cubs, who had been hidden in the tall grass, emerged cautiously, nudging their mother as if to make sure she was still there. Emma knelt beside Saba, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never seen anything like it, the fierce determination of a mother willing to risk everything for her young. "You did it," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved them." The rangers began to secure the area, ensuring that the tranquilized lionesses were safely moved away from the cheetah and her cubs. Matteo approached Emma, a look of admiration on his face. "That was close," he said quietly. "Too close." Emma nodded, still in shock from the events that had just unfolded. But she knew one thing for sure: Saba was no ordinary cheetah. She was a survivor, a mother whose love for her cubs had given her the strength to face down even the most formidable predators. As they prepared to move Saba and her cubs back to safety once more, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from the end of their journey. Something told her that Saba's story was just beginning. The days following the lion encounter were marked by a strange calm. Saba and her cubs were returned to a more secure recovery area, far from the territories of other predators. The enclosure was reinforced, and additional measures were taken to ensure the safety of the small family. Still, the wild had a way of creeping back, always reminding Emma and the other rangers that control over nature was fleeting at best. They could protect Saba from the immediate threats, but they couldn't shield her from the natural order forever. Emma visited them every day, watching the cubs grow stronger with each passing moment. She admired their playful innocence, their tiny forms tumbling over each other in the grass. It was hard to believe these fragile creatures had been on the brink of death just days ago. And Saba, her strength was returning, though slower than Emma had hoped. The mother cheetah still bore the scars of her encounters, both physically and emotionally. Her eyes were always alert, constantly scanning the area, never fully at ease. Emma knew that the time would come when they would have to release Saba and her cubs back into the wild. It was inevitable. The cheetah was born to roam, to hunt, and to raise her young in the vastness of the savannah. But the thought of it filled Emma with a strange mixture of pride and dread. Could they really let her go after everything that had happened? Was Saba ready to face the wild again, this time with 4 cubs to protect? It wasn't long before that question was answered. One afternoon, as Emma was preparing for her routine visit to Saba's enclosure, she received an unexpected call from Matteo. "Emma, I need you to come to the main lodge immediately." His voice sounded more serious than usual. Concerned, Emma hurried over to the lodge, where she found Matteo and the other senior rangers gathered around a table, reviewing maps of the reserve. "What's going on?" Emma asked, sensing the tension in the room. Matteo looked up, his expression grim. "We've just received word that poachers have been spotted near the northern border of the reserve. They've been laying traps and there's a strong chance they're targeting cheetahs this time." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Poachers. The very people responsible for the suffering of so many animals in the reserve, including Saba. The idea that these heartless individuals were now after cheetahs, specifically targeting Saba and her cubs, filled her with rage. "We need to move Saba and her cubs immediately," Matteo continued. "We can't risk them being caught in a trap. They're still too vulnerable." Emma nodded, her mind racing. The thought of Saba falling into the hands of poachers after everything she had been through was unbearable. They had to act fast. Within the hour, a plan was set in motion. The rangers would transport Saba and her cubs to a safer, undisclosed area deep within the reserve, far from the reach of poachers. It was risky, but it was their best chance at keeping the cheetah family safe. As Emma helped prepare the tranquilizer and transport equipment, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. This was the final test, both for Saba and for herself. The cheetah had already faced so many challenges, from the trauma of childbirth to the confrontation with the lions. But this was different. This was a direct threat from the very people who sought to exploit the beauty and majesty of these animals for profit. The sun was beginning to set as the team approached Saba's enclosure. The air was thick with tension. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they readied the tranquilizer gun. Saba, ever vigilant, watched them from a distance, her cubs nestled close to her. "This will be quick," Matteo assured Emma, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Emma nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help but think of the countless animals that had fallen victim to poachers, their lives cruelly cut short for the sake of greed. But not Saba. Not this time. Matteo took aim with the tranquilizer gun, his hand steady. The dart flew through the air, striking Saba gently in the shoulder. The cheetah let out a soft growl, her body tensing for a moment before she began to weaken. Within seconds she was lying down, her eyes fluttering as the tranquilizer took effect. The cubs, unaware of what was happening, huddled closer to their mother, their tiny bodies trembling with fear. Emma's heart ached as she watched Saba's limp form. She knelt down beside her, gently stroking the cheetah's soft fur. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure Saba or herself. The rangers carefully lifted Saba onto a stretcher, making sure the cubs stayed close to her side. Emma stayed with them throughout the entire process, her hands never leaving Saba's side. She felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the cheetah's safety, as if their bond had transcended the boundaries of human and animal. As they transported Saba and her cubs to the new location, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The poachers were still out there, somewhere in the reserve, and the thought of them getting closer made her skin crawl. By the time they reached the secure area deep within the reserve, night had fallen. The stars twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow over the savanna. The rangers worked quickly to set up a temporary enclosure for Saba and her cubs, ensuring that they would be safe for the night. Emma stayed with Saba long after the others had gone back to the lodge. She sat quietly beside the cheetah, watching over her and the cubs as they slept. The night was still, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the grass. Emma felt a deep connection to this moment, as if she was witnessing something far greater than herself. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that Emma finally allowed herself to relax. Saba and her cubs were safe for now. But Emma knew that the fight wasn't over. The threat of poachers would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But as she sat there watching the sunrise over the savanna, Emma realized something profound. She couldn't protect Saba forever. The cheetah was a creature of the wild, born to live and thrive in the untamed wilderness. Her job wasn't to shield Saba from every danger, but to give her the tools to survive on her own. And in that moment, Emma knew that Saba was ready. The next day the decision was made. Saba and her cubs would be released back into the wild. It was time for them to reclaim their place in the natural world. The rangers opened the enclosure and Saba, now fully recovered, stepped out into the open savanna. Her cubs followed closely behind, their tiny legs stumbling over the uneven ground. Emma watched with a mixture of pride and sadness as Saba led her cubs into the vast expanse of the Masai Mara. The cheetah paused for a moment, turning to look back at Emma. Their eyes met, and in that brief second, Emma felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. Saba didn't need her anymore. She was strong. She was a survivor. As the cheetah disappeared into the distance, Emma smiled. She had done her part. Now it was up to Saba. The wild would always be dangerous, but Saba was ready to face it head-on. The end. Thank you for following this incredible journey of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. If you found Saba's story inspiring, please like this video and subscribe to our channel Life Lessons Chronicles. Let's continue to explore the wild, one story at a time, and raise awareness about the importance of protecting our wildlife from poaching and other threats. Together we can make a difference.